Hey, I hope that everybody's doing well. Welcome to another thought-provoking video. Today I want to deal with Coleman Hughes, who is a freelance writer, who is basically a conservative, which he says he's not. But if you listen to much of what he says, it's clear that he is a conservative. I had an opportunity to see a video with him with Piers Morgan, who is basically a talk show host out of England. He's basically similar to the talk show host on Fox News. So, of course, after having an opportunity to see them have a conversation about why we should not receive reparations, I felt the need to discuss it. So the video I'm going to let you listen to is him testifying on the House floor why African Americans should not get reparations. Of course, he was invited by those on the right.
Nothing I'm about to say is meant to minimize the horror and brutality of slavery and Jim Crow.
I can tell you right now, he's going to minimize it and he's going to trivialize it.
Racism is a bloody stain on this country's history, and I consider our failure to pay reparations directly to freed slaves after the Civil War to be one of the greatest injustices ever perpetrated by the U.S. government.
It was.
But I worry that our desire to fix the past compromises our ability to fix the present.
Why he should worry about a desire to fix the past should worry him. Why, I do not know. But what I have discovered is you have many African Americans who are suffering from what I call a post-traumatic slave syndrome, which was coined by my sister, Dr. Joy DeGruy, explaining what it is and why we hate ourselves so much. So it explains why he feels the way he does about reparations.
Think about what we're doing today. We're spending our time debating a bill that mentions slavery 25 times, but incarceration only once.
There's nothing wrong with debating a bill on slavery. Incarceration, that's an issue. In fact, you have so many African American men that are incarcerated as a result of the vestiges of slavery. So they do coincide, they go together. But today the subject should be strictly about slavery and reparations.
In an era with no black slaves, but nearly 1 million black prisoners. A bill that doesn't mention homicide once.
But what he fails to mention is that the descendants, the ancestors of those who were enslaved are still here today, and there are millions of them.
At a time when the Center for Disease Control reports homicide as the #1 cause of death for young black men.
See, that's the way to deflect. We know there's a large number of homicides among African Americans. But no one on the right wants to discuss the why. There is a direct correlation between crime and poverty. And if you look at some of the conditions that many African Americans live in, then you would understand why there's so many homicides. It's not that we inherently criminal or inferior.
I'm not saying that acknowledging history doesn't matter. It does. I'm saying there's a difference between acknowledging history and allowing history to distract us from the problems we face today.
History will not distract us from the problems we're dealing with today. But it's important that we acknowledge the history. Because when we don't deal with what happened in the past, we really can't deal with what's going on now and what's going to happen in the future. We must learn from the past to deal with what's going on now so we can come up with solutions to the issues.
In 2008, the House of Representatives formally apologized for slavery and Jim Crow. In 2009, the Senate did the same. Black people don't need...
We do not need an apology. What we need is policy signed into law that would actually address what has happened in the past and what has continued to happen today. But the fact of the matter is we never dealt with the problems that resulted from slavery. That should be the issue.
Need another apology. We need safer neighborhoods and better schools.
We do need safer neighborhoods and we do need better schools. But what Coleman does not understand, a structure was put in place during slavery and after slavery, which causes many of our communities to be the way they are and our schools. There's a direct correlation.
We need a less punitive criminal justice system.
We do.
We need affordable health care.
Absolutely.
And none of these things can be achieved through reparations for slavery.
Oh, they cannot? I beg to differ. Coleman, what we need are resources. If we have the proper resources, whether they come through reparations, legislation, whatever, it don't matter. We can address some of these problems, but it costs money.
Nearly everyone close to me told me not to testify today. They told me that even though I've only ever voted...
Coleman allowed himself to be used by the right. And of course, it had to be somebody African-American to provide cover for their bigotry, because it wouldn't have the same impact if you sent a white male or a white female to testify why black people shouldn't get reparation. So you have to trot out somebody with this mindset to do the dirty work.
For Democrats, I'd be perceived as a Republican and therefore hated by half the country. Others told me that by distancing myself from Republicans, I would end up angering the other half of the country. And the sad truth is that they were both right. That's how suspicious we've become of one another. That's how divided we are.
Coleman, we have been divided since 1619. African American and those in the dominant culture have never been unified. Even in war, because if you know your history, the black soldiers were treated differently from the white soldiers. Even in war, we have not been unified. Now, have things improved today? Certainly. But if you interview an African American who is in any branch of the military, they would tell you there's still discrimination and racism.
As a nation, if we were to pay reparations today, we would only divide the country further.
The country is not going to be divided further by paying African Americans reparation. It's due. It's a debt. Now, of course, will there be many in the dominant culture who are upset about it? Sure, they will. But the fact of the matter is, Africans were enslaved in these United States from 244 years. They gave free labor. They were killed. Some were sold onto other plantations. The women were raped. They were abused, etc., etc.
Making it harder to build the political coalitions required to solve the problems facing Black people today. We would insult many Black Americans.
Now, I will admit there are some grifters out there who will, for whatever reason, allow themselves to be insulted. And the only reason they will because they want to be validated by the dominant culture on the right. They don't have no problem allowing themselves to be prostituted and used and to provide cover for their bigotry.
By putting a price on the suffering of their ancestors. And we would turn the relationship between Black Americans and white Americans from a coalition into a transaction.
There's never really been a coalition across the board. Now, did Black and white people come together to an extent during slavery? There were a few. There were some abolitionists who did come together with people like Frederick Douglass for the abolition of slavery. There were many Black and white people that came together who were led by Dr. King to eliminate Jim Crow. But across the board, there's been no coalition and we have not been unified as we should be in these United States.
From a union between citizens into a lawsuit between plaintiffs and defendants. What we should do is pay reparations to Black Americans who actually grew up under Jim Crow. And
I agree with that. I really do. But those who are descendants of those who were enslaved should be compensated as well. Because the fact of the matter is, we are still suffering from the vestiges of slavery. Across the board, every institution, there is proof.
And were directly harmed by second-class citizenship, people like my grandparents. But paying reparations to all descendants of slaves is a mistake.
It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's due and it's proper. Because if you study history from 1619 up until today, you will see clearly that there is a great argument as to why African Americans are due reparations.
Take me, for example. I was born 3 decades after the end of Jim Crow into a privileged household in the suburbs.
Now I kind of understand why Coleman feels the way he does. He grew up in a middle-income family, went to some good schools, went to a good college. So he may not be able to relate to many African Americans who grew up in the inner city, in poor urban communities, who had to suffer, who didn't have all the necessities of life, who didn't go to good schools, who grew up in crime-ridden neighborhoods. Now, my thing is this: if you feel like you don't want to receive any form of reparation, that's fine, but do not deny other people the opportunity, because it's due.
I attend an Ivy League school, yet I'm also descended from slaves who worked on Thomas Jefferson's Monticello plantation. So reparations for slavery would allocate federal resources to me, but not to an American with the wrong ancestry, even if...
The fact of the matter is, African Americans are the only group that was enslaved on American soil. Now, there were some Japanese Americans who were put in internment camps during World War II, but guess what? They were given a form of reparation, in which they should. But no group other than African Americans had to endure not only slavery, but Jim Crow segregation because of the color of their skin.
That person is living paycheck to paycheck and working multiple jobs to support a family. You might call that justice. I call it justice for the dead at the price of justice for the living. I understand that reparations are about what people are owed, regardless of how well they're doing.
It is. Because if you incur a debt, you owe the money. Let me give you another example. If you hit me with your car, causing an injury, you should compensate me for that. And keep in mind, I may have to deal with that injury as a result of you hitting me for the rest of my life. So because of that, whether it was a mistake or whether it was intentional or not, you should pay. So the same principle applies to slavery. Damage was done. So as a result of damage being done during slavery to Africans who did not live to get what was due them, it should be given to their descendants. It's only right.
I understand that. But the people who are owed for slavery are no longer here, and we are not entitled to collect on their debts.
How and why have you come to that conclusion? Again, Coleman, just because you don't feel the need that we should be allowed to collect on that debt does not mean that we should. Because if you look at the wealth disproportion between African Americans and white people, it's clear that a debt is owed. The fact of the matter is, even after African Americans were released from slavery, they were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to get a decent job. Even in the sharecropping system, they ended up owning owing money to those whose land they sharecropped on.
Reparations, by definition, are only given to victims. So the moment you give me reparations, you've made me into a victim.
Made him into the victim. See, that's that right-wing narrative. Coleman, they have not made you into a victim. Because like I said, if you hit me with your car, you have made me into a victim. The fact of the matter is our ancestors, our African ancestors were made victims as a result of slavery. So of course, because they were not able to collect on that debt, their descendants should. And I'm sure if they were alive, they would welcome that. And why shouldn't we get it? Why should those who were responsible, and even the businesses, the ship owners, the accountants, or whoever that profited from slavery, why shouldn't they pay that debt? It's due.
Without my consent. Not just that, you've made 1/3 of Black Americans who poll against reparations into victims without their consent.
1/3 of African Americans made into victim. Coleman, my thing is this. If 1/3 do not want to receive any form of reparation, that is their option. But for the rest of us who want the reparation, you should not stand in the way of us receiving because of how you feel. Because I know you have bought into this right-wing ideology that all you have to do is work hard and pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, you can be successful.
And Black Americans have fought too long for the right to define themselves, to be spoken for in such a condescending manner.
Spoken for in a condescending manner. I think if you would ask the average African American anywhere in this country who have been educated about reparations, they would tell you that it's due. Now, of course, somebody has to go speak with them, specifically a politician or someone who has studied why reparations is due. That's just the way it is. And I think the fact that you, Coleman, don't think it's necessary is just ridiculous and sickening.
The question is not what America owes me by virtue of my ancestry. The question is what all Americans owe each other by virtue of being citizens of the same nation. And the obligation of citizenship is not transactional. It's not contingent on answers.
Coleman, first of all, African Americans initially were not considered citizens. And if you look at what's going on today, we're still in many ways not treated as citizens. All you have to do is look at our schools, look at our neighborhoods, look at the high unemployment rate. We're still not treated fairly.
Ancestry. It never expires and it can't be paid off. For all these reasons, Bill H.R. 40 is a moral and political mistake. Thank you.
Immoral and political mistake. He has drunk the right-wing Kool-Aid. As you can see, family, Coleman has some issues. But listen, before I get out of here, I want to read something to you that I came across from the great late Randall Robinson as to why we should receive reparations. From 1619 to 1965 to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, 346 years, the largest human rights crime committed against a people in the modern age. America benefited at the expense of Black people. Since the government was involved, it has a responsibility to make whole the people it victimized, as Germany did the Jews as a result of the Holocaust. During the 19th century, cotton produced more income for the U.S. and the tax coffers than all other American exports combined. The people who produced the cotton was never paid. That was African Americans, Coleman. It produced wealth for other people. The value of the labor of slaves was appropriated to make those who owned them, corporations in the North and South, wealthy. That wealth still exists today. Poverty that was ensured by that slavery of 246 years still exists as well because of a century of discrimination that followed it. And let me share you something from my brother, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Well into this century, U.S. was paying pensions to heirs of Civil War soldiers. The U.S. honors treaties that dated back 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. Many of us would love to be taxed for things we are responsible for, but we know that's not going to happen. The dilemma is inherent. It's impossible to imagine America without the dilemma of slavery. Engagement shaped every crucial aspect of the economy and the politics of America so that by 1836, more than 600 million of almost half of the economic activity in U.S. was devised directly or indirectly from the cotton produced from the million-odd slaves. By the time those enslaved were emancipated, they comprised the largest single asset in America, $3 billion, $1816 more than all the assets in the country combined. The method of cultivating this asset was torture, rape, child trafficking. Enslavement lasted 250 years. When slavery ended, this country could have extended its hollow principle life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all, regardless of the color, but America had other principles in mind. A century after the Civil War, Black people were subjugated to a relentless campaign of terror, which lasted for years. Outside of slavery, there were other things African Americans experienced, such as convict leasing, vagrancy laws, debt peonage, redlining, and racist GI bills, poll taxes, state-sponsored terrorism. That's the thing Coleman don't understand. And wage discrimination alone, family, a debt should be paid. But let me say this one last thing. Many people get wealth through home ownership. A lot of African American veterans were not able to take advantage of the GI Bill, which would have put them in a position to accumulate wealth. Wealth they could have passed on to their children and their grandchildren. It's obvious that reparations is due. Now, I have to be honest, my brothers and sisters, I don't believe we're going to get reparations because of racism and discrimination, unless God moves on the hearts of every branch of government, the executive, judicial, and legislative branch. That's the only way it's going to happen, if the Lord moves on their hearts. But I don't think it's going to happen. But that don't mean that it's not due. So listen, my brothers and sisters, I wanted to respond to Coleman and that ignorance and that madness about reparations, because quite frankly, if you do your research, it is due. So listen, please subscribe to the channel. Also, please subscribe to Legacy by Rating. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment. And in the meantime, stay up and stay informed. I'm going to go ahead and end with prayer. Again, Father, I thank you for another opportunity to present some information that will be beneficial. In Jesus' name. Until the next time, God bless you.